So we start Act 2 with Polonius talking to his servant Rinaldo, and we can assume that a little bit of time has passed since the last act, although we aren't sure how much. He's sending his servant to Laertes in Paris. He's being a nosy parent, and he wants to see how his son is behaving. He has some complicated scheme where Rinaldo will find people who know the Danish students in Paris, and he'll say, he knows Laertes, but not very well. And say, the one I know, insert whatever sin. Gambling, fighting, going to brothels, drinking, etc. And if the person that he talks to says, oh yeah, friend, I know that guy, then we'll know that Laertes hasn't been behaving very well. And if the guy acts like, oh, that doesn't sound like the Laertes I know, then he'll know that his son has shown self-control. And here we see an example of spying instead of trust and communication. This is very interesting because we can also contrast the way he treats Laertes to the way he treats Ophelia. He downplays the severity of the sins he suspects in his son, and then he overplays even just the slightest suspicion that Ophelia has done anything to even appear desirable to Hamlet. But Ophelia comes running in, and she is upset. She's a bit freaked out. She tells her father that she was just sewing in her room, and Hamlet comes bursting in, acting crazy. He's not wearing his hat. His doublet and his shirt are all unlaced and unbuttoned, and his stockings are all dirty and hanging down around his feet. He grabs Ophelia on the wrist very hard, and then he stretches out at arm's length and acts like he's observing her before painting her picture. And he continues to act like totally crazy, jerking his head up and down and sighing, and then he runs out of the room, all while looking back at her over his shoulder. Okay, I'm going to back up just a little bit to the end of Act 1 when Hamlet speaks to Horatio. He warns Horatio not to say anything or act differently if Hamlet starts to act crazy. Don't interfere if I start doing crazy things. The line is, as I perchance hereafter shall think meet to put on an antic disposition. He decided that he's going to put on an antic disposition. He says right there, he's going to pretend to be mad. The reason for this being that he thinks it will keep him safe from Claudius while he plots his destruction. If he's acting like he's mad, then the king isn't going to be as suspicious of him. And in the time that Hamlet would have been set, back in pagan times. This play is interesting because it would have been set in pagan times, but Shakespeare was set in Christian times. So you see kind of a mix of paganism and Christianity in this play. But back in these pagan times, killing a mad person would have been displeasing to the gods. A person who suffered in this way was thought to be influenced by the gods. Of course, this changed through time and wasn't the norm later, but acting mad would give Hamlet security. But why would he do this to the person he loved? Why would he treat her this way? Well, if I had to come up with a theory, I would say because she would tell her father, who would then speak with the king. It would be more convincing than just acting crazy in front of the king alone. And if they hear he's acting this way even with the woman he loves, then it's even more convincing. And, perhaps there's an element of him wanting to test Ophelia and see how she took it. And if she'll continue to be on his side even after he starts to act mad. But I think he also needs to convince her in order to convince Polonius and the king. As you continue to read, I want you to watch and see what you think when you think Hamlet is acting this madness and when maybe his own struggles are coming through. There's a lot of debate on whether or not Hamlet actually does start to lose control of his mind a little bit. And I like to think he's suffering in his own way with a lot of mental challenges, grief, disillusionment, bitterness, stress, loneliness, probably a good deal of circumstantial depression and anxiety, but he's definitely pretending too. There's a line between, he's pretending, but he's also struggling with his own problems. And I'd like you to think, does he continue to act crazy just to keep himself safe from the king? Or does this motive kind of become hazy? And do other motives kind of leak in? Perhaps there's a freedom to do and say what he wants without judgment, and a freedom to act even more impulsively. Or maybe it gives him space to process everything. Or does he remain true to the cause of buying himself time while he tries to figure out how to best get revenge? I don't know the clear boundary here. I just wanted to bring it up as something to think about. In the play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern by W.S. Gilbert, Ophelia says this whole speech about Hamlet's sanity. And the last bit of that speech says, Hamlet is idiotically sane with lucid intervals of lunacy. So I thought that was kind of an apt line there. And just like Hamlet may have wanted, Polonius takes the story straight to the king. Okay, and I just mentioned them, but in scene 2, we meet Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. We can infer that the king has also had instances where he has observed Hamlet's behavior. So he has called for Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to come to his aid. They were friends of Hamlet, and the king wants them to kind of hang out with him and see if they can figure out what's going on. So we have another, kind of like spying thing going on here. We hear news from those messengers who went to Norway. The King of Norway did not know about his nephew Fortinbras and his plans to attack Denmark. He went and stopped it, and Fortinbras has promised not to attack Denmark. So he was given some money and troops and allowed to attack Poland. They want permission to cross through Denmark quietly to Poland. This little bit is actually important because it shows that the new king has just managed the situation of a possible war without any bloodshed, and he secured Denmark safely. So he just diffused this whole big situation. So that is one more reason for him to be a favored king, a smiling villain, and one less reason for Hamlet killing him without consequence. So Hamlet has to continue to be very careful. Polonius comes to declare what he thinks is the cause of Hamlet's transformation, and this scene is a bit comical because he is totally rambling and tripping over his words and going off on tangents. But then he says brevity is the soul of wit. But he's known to ramble all the time. It kind of reminds me a bit of the nurse in Romeo and Juliet. And Gertrude has to say more matter with less art, like get to the point. He shares that the madness is the product of love, and he shares this sweet love note that Hamlet wrote to Ophelia. So they have proof that Hamlet did love Ophelia, and Polonius is sure Hamlet's decline is because Ophelia has pushed him away. So they come up with this plan to test this method, another spying plan. Hamlet comes pacing in and acts like he has no idea who Polonius is. He tells him to guard his daughter from the public or she may end up pregnant. Hamlet acts crazy but gives these biting comments on old men. And Polonius says another famous line, though this be madness, yet there is method in it. It often gets mistakenly quoted as method to the madness. So he's acting crazy, but it also kind of seems like he's insulting Polonius. He probably is. His remark earlier about not letting Ophelia walk in the sun could also be a sort of warning to keep his daughter out of things. Like, don't let her walk in the sun, but also like keep her out of things. This only works though if we assume that Hamlet overheard Polonius and Claudius's plans. If I were directing the play, I would want Hamlet to walk in on them at the end of their conversation and hear them talking about how they were going to use Ophelia to test Hamlet. I feel like it just seems like Hamlet knows. There isn't a specific stage instruction that he walks in on them, but I feel like it just makes sense. And I may be saying this too late, or maybe all of you already know this, but if you haven't been in a play and you haven't read many plays, it might be helpful to know that when it says aside, it means that a character is talking to his or herself, or maybe just to one person. And so not everyone can hear what they're saying, even though they're saying it out loud. And there are a lot of these in this play. So Polonius says an aside and says, how pregnant sometimes his replies are, meaning how full of meaning his replies are, not actually pregnant. He doesn't mean actually pregnant when he says pregnant. He continues to comment on how he has such a way with words that a sane person would not have. And I think maybe he's right in that Hamlet is pretending to be mad, and so he doesn't have to hold back. He doesn't have to answer questions he doesn't want to. He doesn't have to worry about manners or decency. So Rosencrantz and Guildenstern come and speak with Hamlet, and they talk for a bit, and Hamlet refers to Denmark as a prison. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern say, well, then the world is one. And Hamlet says, a goodly one, in which there are many confines, wards, and dungeons. I just wanted to point out this line, because when he says goodly, a goodly prison, he means a large prison, not like a good prison, a large prison. So he's saying the whole world is a large prison. And we have another famous line from Hamlet. He says, for there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And this is one of my personal favorite lines of Hamlet's. So R and G are trying to take the chance to figure out Hamlet's plans, and they keep bringing up Hamlet's ambitions. And Hamlet admits nothing to them. He just says he could be more ambitious if it weren't for his bad dreams. They're sent to see if Hamlet will confide in them since they were schoolmates. But there's a sense that Hamlet is sort of acting like he's being friends with them, but he is in reality so far from admitting any of his plans to them. The way he switches from prose to speak to them backs this up. He's not speaking to them as contemporaries. He's looking down on them. They don't deserve to be spoken to in the higher verse. So RNG tell them that they came back to Denmark only to see Hamlet. But they're just not very good actors. They're not good liars. And Hamlet is, of course, suspicious of the king, and he says, "You were sent for, and there is a kind of confession in your looks, which your modesties have not craft enough to color. I know the good king and queen have sent for you." They admit, yeah, okay, we were sent for, but they're hesitant to give any more info up. And Hamlet says, don't worry about breaking your promises and secrets. I'll just tell you why. And he gives one of the most recognized speeches in the play. It's absolutely beautiful language. He describes the earth and the sky and humans with such beauty and care. And then he also says, none of that beauty holds any joy for me. The earth seems to him a sterile promontory. It's interesting, though, that Hamlet doesn't seem to have lost his sanity in this whole conversation. Yes, he's very apathetic and joyless, but then this theater troupe comes and he kind of revives him a little. He's excited, but also he starts to act crazy again, especially when Polonius enters. He even says he's only mad north-northwest when the wind is southerly. I know, okay, let me say that line again. I botched that. He says he is only mad north-northwest. When the wind is southerly, I know a hawk from a handsaw. He sets right to messing with Polonius, even saying to him, buzz, buzz, at some point, basically meaning like, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. And honestly, Polonius may deserve it a little. Hamlet says to Polonius, "O Jephthah, judge of Israel, what a treasure hadst thou." He's referring to kind of a horrible story from Judges, the book of Judges in the Bible, about Jephthah, who was in charge of an army of Israelites. In a battle, he promised to make a sacrifice of the first living creature he saw after the battle if they won. Well, they won, and the first living creature he saw was his daughter, and he sacrificed her. So Hamlet is bringing up this story, acting mad, and he's kind of goading Polonius about his daughter, maybe accusing him of using his daughter unfairly as a tool, which is why I kind of think it works that Hamlet knows they're going to plant Ophelia, that they're going to use her to figure things out. And so that's why I think he overheard. Hamlet's scheming something up. He's excited about the players because he has a plan. He knows these actors. It's been a while, so he wants to make sure they're really capable actors. And he starts reciting a story from the Aeneid where Aeneas is telling Dido about how Pyrrhus slaughtered Priam in the Trojan War and how his wife Hecuba saw it happen. Hamlet starts the speech and has the actors finish. It's long, but the actor proves worthy to the task, and he even gets emotional when speaking of Hecuba, witnessing the slaughter of her husband. His face flushed, and he sheds real tears. Hamlet is pleased and asks them to perform a play called The Murder of Gonzagas the next day. He also has a part he's going to add to the script. So Hamlet, I'm losing my place here on my notes. Everyone leaves, and Hamlet is alone, and we hear him kind of think out loud about everything that's going on. He speaks of this actor's abilities to show such emotion, and all for Hecuba. If he felt the real despair and troubles that Hamlet felt, the actor would just drown the stage with tears. And he kind of starts to criticize himself for being so slow to get revenge. He's doing his best to play mad, but he's not really getting anywhere. Is this because his strategy is just kind of fruitless and he hasn't had a good chance to find evidence of his father's murder? Or is it something in his character that's holding him back? Or a bit of both? I like to think personally that it is a little bit of both. I'll quote Shakespeare after all one last time when he says, "His attraction to revenge and his resistance to it are part of the intellectual tension that makes Hamlet such an engaged and engaging character." But sometimes I think we forget about why he would want to be sure before going forward and how the king and he are circling each other. It's not all just him procrastinating, but there may be some of that in there too. Everyone interprets it a little differently. And seriously, there are so many interpretations of this character. I tend to like to go for the interpretation that informs acting choices the most, like I said earlier, but Hamlet really is such a tricky character to play. So thinking of him as having a clear objective of keeping himself safe from the king while he gets proof of his father's murder, with this underlying anger and bitterness about the whole situation, especially towards his mother's pardon and all, and a general apathy for things that used to make him happy. And why wouldn't he be happy? He's tasked with something that he does not want to do, and nothing seems as if it will ever be right again. But he does go forward. He does have a plan now. The play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. He's going to have the actors do a play that is similar to Claudius killing his brother, and he's going to watch the king's reaction and see if he acts guilty. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and I will see you back in the next video in Act 3.